Yeah, I'm okay now. Am I audible?
Hi, Amrit. Welcome. Yes,
Hi, hi,
thank you.
Hello, Ahmed.
hi, hi.
Everybody, good afternoon. Thank you all so much for joining. Welcome. Um, a great warm welcome to everybody here today from our side on to take part and listen in and maybe ask questions later on the Expert Dialogue series. Today we are discussing accessible and multiple purpose sports infrastructure. Quick introduction from my side on myself and our eminent speakers. We are very proud and honored to have such an experienced team of speakers today. Myself, I'm Vincent Van Noord. I work with EBTC. I'm the Director Europe with over, let's say, approximately 10 years of experience in the field of sports and sports infrastructure, among others in India. I have been here for 14 years, and very happy to have my co-host here today, Mr. Samir Jain, who is a managing director with Primus Partners. Welcome to you. His focus is largely on leadership in smart cities. So we'll be touching upon that as well, how that links to sports. We have Mr. Amrit Mathur here today.
Hi.
Thank you for being here, sir. Mr. Mathur has over 3 decades of experience in the field of sports, working with in the private sector with IPL clubs, leading IPL clubs, with the government as an advisor, with the Sports Authority of India, etc. A wealth of experience here. Welcome to you. And we have Sander van Stiphout, who is from the Johan Cruyff Arena in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. He leads the international team, where he shares his knowledge and experience from what they have learned over the past almost 3 decades as well in the stadium that has been operational for that time period. Very aspirational and inspirational stadium that focuses on sustainability and innovation. Yeah, love to hear from you later. And we have another speaker joining, Mr. Ram Subramanian, who is the founder of Collage Design. They are a sports architecture firm, also a wealth of experience in India, done several stadiums. They were instrumental in the development of the infrastructure for the World Cup Under 17 a few years ago. So he will join in later. So apologies for that. We will see him soon. So a little bit about the context for today. When we were discussing the topic for this session, initially we were looking to maybe focus on larger sports infrastructure, which is of course very important, and we have a lot of knowledge and experience in house with our cluster partners with the EBTC Sports Cluster, and that is of course the elite part of sports. But us just coming out of a pandemic and people have been restricted. Maybe everybody can mute their cameras for a second. Thank you. We've just come out of the pandemic. Hopefully, it is becoming to an end, and where we have not been able to go out as much. So, the ability for people to to go out and play sports again, from a health perspective, from a social perspective, from a mental wellness perspective. These are these are very important elements, you can say, if have been coming out of this extreme dire situation for many. Also, of course, the Indian government is very active and proactive and progressive. They have several schemes and programs and initiatives that they're working on. Some of them are the smart cities. What we say is when in the urban development space with smart cities, for example, I think the bottom line there is that the city needs to be, we look at cities to be livable cities. So in that whole development of smart cities, where we look at smart, new, innovative technologies, sometimes the livability elements are also a little bit overlooked. So there we want to talk a little bit about sports and sports infrastructure, how we can make it accessible to everybody. That will also improve the livability and the health of a city. So couple this was a little bit of the background, and we have some of our speakers who we would like to engage with on a couple of these these topics in that respect. We will go one by one and have a few questions, and I will do a tag team together with Samir. And in the end, if time allows, we will also have some questions from the audience. So I would like to start with you, Mr. Mathur. If we look at the current status in India of sports and sports infrastructure, we see that people more and more, as we discussed, it becomes it's also a little bit of a fashion and a trend that people are becoming more healthy and more conscious. People are willing to play more sports, which is a good development. But do you think that right now there is a proper strategy from the government side to make accessible sports infrastructure? Is it available? Is it something that is planning? And what are your thoughts on that? How can we ensure that the community has this access? Over to you, Mr. Mathur.
Thanks, Vincent. Hello, everybody else on the panel and everyone else who's joined in for this discussion. I think, Vincent, before we go into the specific question you asked, I think it's proper to put some context to sports in India. Till not very long back, maybe 15 years ago, sports was discouraged. It was not something people approved of. It was something extra. It was extracurricular, not something which was central and important. I think that has changed. In the last 15 years, everybody understands and realizes the importance of sports. There is a huge change in terms of how it is viewed. Now it is something which is considered essential for personal development, for the nation, and it has many, many benefits. And everybody's sort of waking up to that feel-good factor of sport. And just to give an instance, the drive and the change has been done at the highest level, with even the Prime Minister getting involved with sports, success of the teams, encouragement to sports person. So there's been a major shift overall in how sports is viewed in India. Now, as you mentioned, there are certain things that the government is doing directly. They've taken up sports at the elite level. They are supporting the top Indian sportsmen, providing them all the facilities to excel. So that is, the government's commitment to make India an important sporting power and doing whatever it needs to achieve success at the international level. At the same time, they're also focusing on the grassroots, on mass, on everybody getting involved. So you have initiatives of Khelo India, you have initiatives of Fitness India. So, you're tackling sport at different levels, the elite, recreational, and just for health and health purposes. Now, that's what the government is doing. There's also been a major shift socially. Sports is more acceptable. Parents who were earlier discouraging their kids to take up sport are actually now investing in sport. Sport is considered a career. It is something which is seen to be good to be involved in. And so also because of the economic development of the country, how it's moved on, sports has got linked to entertainment, health, fitness, passion. So there's been all-round change in sport. Now coming back to what you asked specifically in terms of infrastructure. Now, for a long time, the focus on infrastructure was on creating big stadiums for big events. You want the Commonwealth Games, so need many different kinds of infrastructure to host the games. Similarly, the Asian Games or a World Cup in a particular discipline. So the focus at that time was to create infrastructure for events. The problem with that is A, it is very expensive. B, it is difficult to maintain. 3, you can't find enough use for it because you can't keep getting those big events, every few months or every few years. So I think everybody's realized that that's not the right way to go. So now recently there has been a shift of moving from stadiums and big events to multi-purpose, smaller facilities which can be used on a regular basis for training, for practice, for recreational purposes, also for competitive purposes. So you need flexible, maybe indoor, smaller facilities which can be used to engage with the community on a local level and are not dependent on those big ticket events for sustenance. So I think this is going to be the major push going forward. Also, because there has been now an understanding that whatever you may do in sport, it doesn't work till you engage with the community and get more and more people involved in it. Just to give you a very recent example, the Delhi government put out an advertisement in the major newspapers announcing recreational and competitive tournaments for age groups of 14 to 60 plus. This is based on communities. They're dividing Delhi into various zones. There's going to be competition of in certain selected 12 or 14 disciplines for different age groups. For under 14, going up to women and to elderly beyond 60. Now, I think this is the first major push of the government anywhere in India for getting the community involved into sport. I think the idea is that the multi-purpose flexible facility should become a social hub where people come, they play, they interact with each other, there's some kind of social bonding, and it becomes a busy, active place where people meet and work together. So I think going forward, the focus will be on these smaller so-called stadiums or facilities or infrastructure, whatever name you want to give it, where more and more people get involved. So that's what I feel. That's where things are. And another stark example of this is that one in Jaipur, which is what 250 miles from here, kilometers. One member of parliament, who's earlier the sports minister, Rajvardhan Rathore, has created in one city 17 small sports infrastructure facilities. So the idea is that villages or localities or colonies and people living around that area come there in the evening. The kids play football, they run, they throw a ball, they engage in sporting activity. So if Jaipur can create 17 small facilities in one city, the Delhi government announcing this big scheme of engagement with society and recreational competition among people. That's one side. The other side is that the government has put up the Nehru Stadium, which is supposedly the iconic and the most expensive sports facility in the country, up for sale, saying we can't maintain it, we need to find better use for it. So I think the direction in which we are going in terms of infrastructure is pretty clear. These are just signs which are beginning. There is interest from various other states to create these smaller hubs of sporting activity and infrastructure, and I think that's going to be the way forward. Yeah, I'll just leave this thought with the other people on the panel for a revert, and maybe we can take it we can take it forward after that.
Thank you, Amrit. You that historically the focus has been on large infrastructure for big events, but lately we have seen the focus towards building smaller facilities with multi-purpose focus. But one of the other issues that has stood out is also the focus has been mostly on the urban side of things and not so much as the rural
Yeah.
strata. And you talked about community participation for us to realize the larger potential of these sports in India. And this, we believe, requires a much more programmatic approach to transforming sports, including the necessary infrastructure. And Khelo India is one such initiative which has taken
Yeah.
sports to the complete ecosystem in India, 360-degree view. And we have started to see the effects in that manner. Now, we wanted to get your views on what has been that programmatic approach that this program or this initiative has taken, and what more could be done to make Khelo India the real root of this transformation.
Listen, the purpose of Khelo India was to get more and more people involved in sport. Starting with, it started with the competition among different states. So that was the first level of Khelo India. The next level of Khelo India came with the Khelo India University Games, and apparently the plan is to take it down one more step to do Khelo India School. So that is one aspect of Khelo India, but it still doesn't touch rural India as you mentioned. It is still urban India. It is actually, widening the base, but still doesn't tap into the huge potential of rural India. So I think there the government's targeting what is called the fit India movement, where it's not just sport. People are just being encouraged to do whatever it takes to get fit, maybe play, go for a walk, cycle, go for a run. But I think the next big leap will have to be another initiative like Hello India, which goes into rural areas of India. Now, some states are doing it. You know, Recently Kerala has announced what is called the State Olympics. A similar thing is being planned in Rajasthan. Haryana does something, not really as a state Olympics, but they do, pretty detailed inter-district competitions. So I think that will happen, whether it comes through a central initiative of maybe something like Hello India, or if it might be a result of individual states, taking this forward. Just as I mentioned, Kerala announced this big Kerala Olympics. So, and other states I know are working on something similar. The problem here is uh, the government doesn't have the expertise to organize something as big as this, because if even a small state, not a small state, a state like Rajasthan has 35 districts. Now, to organize, say, a competition among 35 districts in 10 disciplines is a huge task. It requires a lot of work in terms of organization, administrative ability. It requires a lot of resources. It requires a lot of planning. So the administrative structure of a state, which is normally a sports council with three officers sitting in it, you can't cope with this. So while the intention is good, it needs to be thought through properly. You need to find resources, you need to find administrative ability, you need a specialized agency to do this. But you're right, it has to happen. It'll come very soon. And again, as soon as you talk of these, you know, sports being taken deeper into rural areas, the issue of infrastructure arises. And just as I mentioned, Jaipur has got 17 small functional facilities. Those will have to be, created across India. Because there's no point saying we're going to have, rural sport, inter-district sport, state Olympics, if there are no infrastructure on the ground for people to be training and practicing and getting ready for those tournaments. It doesn't work that you bring all of them into one big city, into one big stadium and hold this. So I think the intent is good, but it requires a lot of hard work to actually execute it.
Absolutely. A related question, Amrit. You talked about the expertise that may be lacking in a broad sense, and also the fact that today India's one-third population stays in the cities, uh, and that's where the focus of sport has been. But then the urban setup, the way the country has grown, also creates a very complex interplay of the ecosystems, which results in the issues such as pollution, traffic, safeties, which probably may not have the desired effect of sports that we would want. Uh, and in smart cities, we have seen instances of having sports integrated into quality of life, but not at a institutional level. What do you think could be done while the journey from urban to rural and then covering the larger strata is continuing? But what we could do with what we have today in these cities?
Listen, uh, one of the positives coming out of COVID is that there's greater awareness about health and fitness and things. So there is a shift where automatically people which who earlier had to be pushed into this are happily embracing it. But what you mentioned is correct, that while I might be more aware and might be interested in pursuing sport for maybe health, fitness, whatever reason, there is a challenge, and pollution is a problem, infrastructure is a problem. And I saw some amazing stat that in Australia, I think 70 to 80% of, of the population, in terms of adult population, is engaged in some kind of a professional sports activity, whether through a club, whether through whatever other organization. Now that figure in India is abysmally low. If you look at people engaged in sport, uh, it is a very small fraction. So maybe there is in cities a need for having a more robust club culture where, if you are a cyclist, there is a cycling club or an organization where you can enroll, become a member, and then participate in the activities. Again, these things are happening in a haphazard manner. There are increasingly instances of running clubs across India. There might be hundreds of running clubs in Delhi, in other cities, but it is disorganized. I think there is a need, especially in the urban areas, as you mentioned, to develop this club culture so that a non-professional sports loving adult can benefit from joining into the and tapping into the system.
I think the club culture is good, and it works well in other countries. I know it also works well in the Netherlands. I think in
Yeah,
India, though, that might be a little bit of a threshold for many people, right?
yeah,
To get into that club culture. So, and I think also in India, people are not so keen on traveling long distances, right, to do sports. So ideally, they have facilities which are not too far from where they reside.
yeah,
You know. Also, if you develop infrastructure, you need to have some kind of a business model, ideally, right? Because otherwise, we've seen some
mm,
of the open gyms, for example, that have been created in parks. But
yeah.
I mean, very quickly, with all the elements that we have in India, right? The heat, the rain, etc., it deteriorates very fast. So it's not properly maintained, and then you can't really use it anymore, and it becomes unsafe, even maybe to use. So, what do you think about the sustainability, financial viability? How can we create infrastructure that that doesn't need constant pumping of money from the government, for example?
Listen, I'm quite convinced that if, say, in a locality in one part of a city, if there is a multi-purpose sports facility available with this business model of membership, annual, monthly, etc., together with some hospitality and entertainment, etc., it will work. Because there are quite a few instances, even in Delhi, where these are working very well. The City Fort complex is a great example of how not an inexpensive facility, by and large, not really cheap, but relatively inexpensive, because it's not a stadium or an event related sports infrastructure that functions very well. There are other complexes in Delhi which have been created by the DDA which are functioning quite well. But again, they are multi-purpose, they are relatively low cost, they are flexible in terms of being able to provide um, access to different disciplines in one place. And the key now is you need to attract the family together to these destinations. It can't be just the male member coming and going to the swimming pool or going to the gym. It's ideally the family should be encouraged to come in the evening or whatever time. The kids can do their own thing. The ladies can do what they prefer. The men can go hit a football or play a game of tennis, squash, whatever. So it has to be multi-purpose. It has to be created and designed for the family, for everybody. And obviously, the key is the community around, in the place where the facility is located. There has to be a clear uh, sort of program to encourage them to come and use this facility and make it attractive for them.
Yeah, thanks, Amrit. Yeah, I agree, 100% agree. I think one aspect that we need to also consider, which we can maybe discuss a little bit later, is it needs to be managed and operated properly and maintained properly, ideally. Especially, you need extra care and attention in a place like India where the elements are so severe. So you need to have somewhat of a professional organization, ideally, who can look after these things. But we can touch upon
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah, can't agree more because if the facility is not attractive in terms of how it's run, whether it's clean, whether the infrastructure is functional all the time, then it just puts off people. And somebody who comes in will get disinterested and leave, and you lose him. So it's vital that not only do you have the right infrastructure, but its operation, maintenance, upkeep is crucial. Because
Yes.
listen, there are so many things to distract, or there's so many demands on somebody's time. So if I go to a sports facility and if I get um, sort of negative vibes from it, for whatever reason, I'll do something else.
Yeah.
So that's the challenge which whoever is running and operating the facility will have to face all the time.
Yeah. So thank you, Amrit. So maybe we can now
Yeah.
move over to Sander for now. Um, Sander, maybe you can share with us a little bit, how this works in a place like the Netherlands, for example. I know the club culture is also very strong in the Netherlands, especially where football is concerned. I believe almost 10% of the population plays football from amateur to professional. But so that is one, but of course you also have the hockey and other sports. But and so maybe you can talk a little bit about that, and also about the multi-purpose infrastructure. How is that made accessible to the public at large and the community? And Holland is a sporting nation, I believe, right? And I'm asking you, I actually know because I'm from that neck of the woods, but maybe you can enlighten us a bit on that.
Okay. Well, first to thank you, Vincent, and great to be part of the panel. I completely agree with Mr. Matu of switching. That you recognize the switch of being in India a little bit less focused on large infrastructure, but actually building up the smaller infrastructure to get the participation up to higher levels. Yeah, this is the question you're asking me, Vincent. We have in the country. But this has been built over the last 100+ years. But quite active in sports in schools to begin, and every village and every neighborhood has its own clubs, and clubs range from football, field hockey, baseball, tennis. If you want to do a sport, it's always close by, and you can play one. And the participation levels are indeed very high. Also because it's also subsidized by the government quite a bit. So the fees that you pay are relatively low, at least low to a level that anyone can participate. And most of the clubs have also special programs so that if you for some reason cannot pay the fees that are required, then they are covered for you. So in that sense, you build up a lot of participation. There's competitions on all levels. There's over 1 million football players in a country of 17 million. Everyone plays on its own level. In fact, like my son, 12 years old, he's at a certain level. He plays with other kids at a certain level. They can go up or they can go down. That doesn't matter. Everyone's, the fun part is definitely driving everything. The fun part and the social part. And that's also referring to what Mr. Matur says. It has to be a family location where families gather, because it's a social fundament that builds that builds basically this participation levels, right? And this supports these participation levels. If you are good at a certain sport, of course you go to better teams, you compete with on other levels, and ultimately you perhaps make it to a more professional level, and then you end up in a stadium playing for people in the stands, etc. So it is a well-built pyramid where participation levels are extremely high, and that builds up to the elite sports and to the professional sports. Obviously, that has been, as I said, a process of 100+ years. So this is not, it is not a copy and paste model, but looking for ways of driving on the fact that healthy lifestyles are now get way more attention and support than in 20 years ago, 10 years ago. The positioning from sports in India taking a complete different dimension now, and trying to build that and support that with a social fundament, I think is definitely the great next steps to take. And that determines what kind of sports infrastructure you actually build and design for.
So Amrit, maybe if I can ask about, sorry, going a little bit out of script here, but you think that it's possible for the Indian government to maybe subsidize the access for people, maybe the EWS, the economically weak leaguer section, you can say, or people who don't have the means, so that they can participate and partake and access, sports, maybe get coaching programs, etc. Is that are these kind of, if you have the infrastructure, would that be possible? You think that certain subsidization from the government can be, come into play?
Well, most definitely. But the key thing is to have the infrastructure, which the government must fund, because I think that's the way to go, and which, for instance, the Delhi government is doing. They've created infrastructure across the city through the DDA and through their own efforts. Now, once the infrastructure is there can be specially designed schemes for the EWS, for maybe the underprivileged, anybody who can't afford it, but who has some potential and skills which need to be supported. So I think that's the easier part of it. The more important aspect of it is to actually fund and create these infrastructure across the city. The point made that it has to be close to where you are, it has to be in the neighborhood, it has to be uh, designed in a manner that the family gets engaged, the society supports it with living around the facility. And it is at different levels. As you mentioned, if a child who's 12 years old is skilled and has potential, he moves on to a better team, into a better coaching system. So I think it's simple, and I think it's doable, and it's happening, especially in a place like Delhi. And that's the model which other states will follow. We know, for instance, Orissa is doing something at a different level. They're positioning the entire state as somebody who's fueling Indian sport. They sponsor the Indian hockey team. They're organizing world-class events in Orissa. They've got multiple specialized centers of excellence and academies. They've gone the grassroots way also. So they've got a terrific 360-degree sports program. And I think that's a major, major change, that a state understands and realizes the potential of sport and how it can actually transform the youth. So you are building national capital by having better citizens, not only by learning the values of sport, but by actually getting fit, getting healthy. So I think Orissa's case study is a tremendous thing that's happened in India. And don't forget, this has happened in a country which is normally not supportive of sport. So for a state government to actually go entirely the other end of the spectrum and pursue actively a policy of this nature, I think is terrific.
Right. Thanks. Just moving on, Amrit, you and Vincent did talk about the financial viability of the sports infrastructure, which is necessary for us to provide the access. And also, a lot of audience have asked questions in similar. So I thought I'll just take up a couple of questions around that. India has over 100 international standard stadiums, and of course, there are sporting facilities in the colleges and public grounds, and of course, the private facilities. However, we still see that the sporting infrastructure has an occupancy rate of less than 50% on an average across the year, uh, which kind of creates a bit of a vicious circle. That on one hand, we talk about giving access to the larger community, but at the same time, we have sports infrastructure which is underutilized, which also has resulting effect on the financial viability and monetization, etc. So I think it'll be interesting to know. And of course, there was a question around the import duties on the surfaces that we are bringing in, or the multi-purpose usefulness of the sports stadia. So if you just give us, a bit of a thought around what can be done to make the sports infrastructure more viable, uh, of course, in the process, make it accessible too.
Listen, I think you've touched upon a very important point, that we have this contradictory situation where in most places there is no sports infrastructure. And in some places there is sports infrastructure which is underutilized. You know, again, going back, I can give you several examples of Delhi where there is lots of extra capacity in the sports infrastructure which is already existing. Now, part of the problem, as I mentioned earlier, was that these were all created for events. They're not very friendly in terms of people coming in the evening for training or just having a recreational activity around sports. So, going forward, I think you have to invest into this multi-purpose, smaller infrastructure, which allow and encourage people to come every day, train, play, have fun, and go back. So I think you have to make a radical change in terms of what you mean and what you understand by sports infrastructure for mass participation of people. So I think that's a new direction you need to take. And if you were to sort of create a model, um multi-purpose, indoor, flexible sports infrastructure. Obviously, you run into issues which you mentioned of import duties, some restrictive practices, etc. But I think those can be addressed. Those can be sort of, with active advocacy, you can through organizations like FICCI and CII, etc., represent your case and get those concessions from the government because I think the government is pretty flexible on this. And by imposing a certain amount of duty on, say, a synthetic surface for sport, it's not a major revenue earner for the government. It's not that huge quantities or huge imports are being done under that category, which will impact revenues for the government. The government can easily take a positive view, see it as something which is needed for the larger good, and do that. But I think industries, bodies, and maybe organizations like EBTC need to create this awareness of you know aligning yourself with the policies of the government for them to be successfully executed. This is the support the government needs to provide. And that I think will happen because there are pretty positive, sports minded people at key positions, whether it's in the finance ministry, whether it's in the sports ministry or the youth affairs. So I think there's a way forward. But yes, I think the general direction has to focus in terms of sports infrastructure on multi-purpose indoor facilities.
Indoor, only indoor.
Thank you.
Sorry. Only indoor, Amrit. Because actually,
No, no.
when we were,
Listen,
yeah.
listen. No, the indoor facility would be the hub. Obviously, you will have field hockey, you will have football, you will have athletics, which is outdoor. But the indoor thing can be used for table tennis, boxing, wrestling, volleyball, there's so many other things. Judo, taekwondo, yoga, you name it. So that is the core facility. Obviously, space permitting, you'll have a football field, you'll have a track for somebody to run, you'll have a swimming pool outside. But as I said, it has to be designed in a manner and operated in a manner where you attract the women, the ladies, the young kids, the elderly, everybody to come in.
Sure. May I invite Sander to share his views, please?
Sure. And I think what we see in just a little bit of a European perspective, but what we see here in the area developments in general is that that it's factored in the complete area development. So if there is a new area for housing being developed, then you see general facilities such as sports facilities, but also let's say a library or some other more supportive functions for the entire community hubs being factored in the entire development. So basically, the project developers pay for these kind of facilities. So that is also a way of looking at it, and it creates value because, in fact, the houses that they create become more valuable because actually you have that sport facility in the close surroundings, right? So that is also a way of looking at it. And for the rest, I completely agree with Mr. Marco that these facilities, number one, do not have to be that expensive. A swimming pool is a little bit of a different story, but all the other more generic sports facility can be reasonably priced, I think, and can be supporting different kinds of sports. Right?
How
But
do they make
the
the
area
money?
development
Sorry.
perspective, I think, is an interesting one. So that will be good to look at.
Sorry, Sandra, I thought you paused there, but how do they make these facilities in the Netherlands financially sustainable?
Well, So that is basically by having the developers pay for it. So it ultimately it's factored in the price of the house then. Yeah, because the project developer takes on the job to develop, let's say, X amount of houses, and creates also the facilities that come with it. So and also the roads and the parks and whatever is more generic area, a general area in that same environment, and that is factored in that price. So in that way, you have the bill paid, so to speak. I think in Holland it's also very well recognized to support healthy lifestyles. In the long run, it will lower the cost of the medical costs for the country, right? So we see that as a definitely as a prevention of medical, let's say, cost in a later stage. So therefore, promotion of healthy lifestyles has a cost, and therefore is part of our government budget as well.
Sure. I just moved to a question. We have touched upon it with respect to giving access to the larger communities, and both from an Indian point of view as well as from a European point of view. I would like to get your views, gentlemen. The problem is that in India, sports is a state subject, and hence is a function of the state's priorities, how states allocate resources, etc., and their own capacities, as Amrit talked about, which explains the differences in the quality of a sports infrastructure in various pockets of the country, and also the resultant performance of the sport personnel in India. And there are many factors, whether it's the land availability, whether it's about the facilities or the financial access or even the capacities. But it is felt that unless and until we make it an integrated part of your urban planning or urban design, we might see these pockets of excellences, but a larger failure to integrate the sports into the community well-being. I'm sure these challenges may have been felt in Europe as well, and steps taken. I want to get your views, both of you, to share with us as to what can be done around it, and some lessons that all of us can take. Maybe you can start with Sander, you, and then Amrit.
Yeah, I think in the government has implemented a lot of rules and regulations where it's mandatory for in specific area developments to have, for example, a certain amount of parking per house being developed, a certain amount of parks per house being developed, a certain amount of sports facilities per house being developed. So these regulations are enforced in new area developments, and that requires creativity from project developers to solve that business case. And I think that is a way of doing that. But obviously, this is only concerning newly developed areas. So in current areas, that's a different story that requires government investment in that sense, and that is how we regard this, because it's and as I said before, it's supporting the healthy lifestyle. It's also regards with promoting sports in general. So basically, governments pick up that bill, but there's also a participation fee, of course. So that is part of the bill being paid. But the investment is often made by the government, because it's very difficult to really close the business case for these sports facilities. It can be done, right? But it cannot be done in all locations for different reasons. I mean, if you look at optimizing usage of these facilities, that is a way of creating additional revenues. It's like making it also a social place. I saw some questions regarding if you have a lot of weddings, you cannot play sports. Yes, but perhaps there's a trade-off between a wedding to make the whole case sustainable, but also creating that way the facility to play sports. So putting a lot of pressure on usage and on occupancy rates is important for that business case. But perhaps it's in this what the topic, what we're talking about, is not necessarily only a business case, but it should be regarded as a value case. How do you regard promoting health? That's a tough business case, perhaps, but it is an important value case. So I think you should regard it in a bigger picture in that sense.
Amit, quick comment from you.
I think what he said is absolutely bang on. That it's for the governments to realize that it's not strictly a business case. There's a larger picture. There's a larger value in terms of health and character building of and creating a good citizen. So one thing I want to point out is that our journey in sports promotion is very recent. Actually, it's not even just about 20 years old. Whereas Europe and the perspective we are hearing about Netherlands, you go back 100 years, maybe more, in terms of sports being integral to social life. So we are just starting out on a journey. As you mentioned, there are some centers of excellence, some progressive states which have understood the importance and are taking steps. It'll take time for others to also realize the potential of a healthy population, sports minded youth. So we are early days for India, but much more effort. But states are, till now, it has been a very low priority for them, and whatever little interest they've shown in sport till now is in the wrong area, which is of creating a sports stadium for whatever reason. But there is a shift, there is greater awareness, there's greater understanding, and that gives me optimism about the future, that more and more such centers of excellence are coming up. The states are understanding the potential and the benefits of active sports minded people, and they're taking steps. But for a country as big as ours, it has to be a massive movement with the involvement of states and progressive leaders like Orissa, like in Haryana, like in Madhya Pradesh, Kerala, Goa, who are more active and more progressive in terms of sports investment and policies. So I'm hopeful. I think we're just starting on a new journey, but I think the future looks pretty bright to me.
Yeah, thanks, Amit.
Thank you
I
so
agree.
much. Very encouraging.
Yes.
Vincent, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Samir. Sorry, actually, about 10 years ago, we were already discussing with the sports ministry, and they had a plan to develop multi-purpose mini sports or sports infrastructure at block level in India. So India has 5,545 blocks, and I think that was also the beginning when they started looking at Khelo India. So maybe we can revive that whole discussion again with the ministry.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can do something there. Also, I think it's a good. I think there are some good examples, like in Delhi, the DDA has done, which are quite well planned and organized and utilized. So I think it's good to build on that. See if we can maybe collectively create some more success stories with good planning and management. And even though the business case is not always easy, I think the government is willing maybe to do the initial capex funding, and then the opex has to come later. So I'm sure that with creative revenue models we can possibly pitch in here. So yes, I think it is going in the right direction, and I think it is a positive trend that's happening. So yeah, quite optimistic actually how things are going. Just one last question, because this is a question with regard to Goa. I live in Goa, coincidentally, and yes, indeed, there are a lot of grassroots. This is a question from Shamsul. There is a lot of talent, grassroots talent in Goa, and the infrastructure is not great. So this is maybe something. These initiatives that we're talking about today, potentially we can take this up with the government. The elections have just been finished, so let's see with the new government that's come in. But this is again, of course, a state subject. So I'm very happy to try and be proactive here and push something so that we can create better infrastructure, because Goa sports and especially football is super popular and there's a lot of talent, but they do need the right guidance and they do need right coaching, and they do need infrastructure. So yeah, that is something that we will definitely, be looking at. So I'm afraid we've run out of time. So I just wanted to say thank you so much to everybody, my co-host Samir, and our excellent speakers today, Mr. Ahmed Mathur and Sander Verstiphout. Thank you so much for your contribution. We will be working, of course, closely with you in the future, and hopefully we can, make something happen on the ground, and we can get, make India a more mature sporting nation in the near mid future. Thank you so much. Samir, any last words from you?
No, I think you've covered it well. Thank you for everyone and also the audience. You have shared your questions. We will attempt at answering those with support from Ender and Amrit and come back to you all.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.